Welcome to part 3 of this mini-series about Blackpool Pleasure Beach and its history. You know the drill, you've seen the first couple of episodes. We're going to go through old attractions, fires, adverts, celebrities, you name it. This time we're going to look at Geoffrey Thompson, who I put a poll up and asked you guys who you thought had had the biggest influence on the park. It was kind of a loaded question. I expected the answer that I got, and it was, of course, Geoffrey Thompson. That's probably because most of you remember him. Some of you might remember Leonard Thompson, probably none of you are old enough to remember William Bean, and of course Amanda gets quite a lot of criticism, and we'll cover that in a future episode. I'm going to try and keep this to one episode, but Geoffrey was a busy guy, so this may be part 1 and 2. Let's get into it. So we've got a pretty simple start to Geoffrey's reign, and that was a caterpillar ride. Now, I found a couple of pictures of this ride, but in both of them, the ride train itself is covered up. So I don't know if there was anything different about it, but it does just look like a caterpillar ride that just kind of goes round a track. And you move on to 1977 and we have our first major investment under Geoffrey's reign. That was, of course, Steeplechase, a ride that is still with us to this day. It's an aerodynamics classic. There was only ever 2, I believe, maybe 3 around the world, and this is the only one that still is in existence. Now, I did Walk the Wheelie last year, and well, they said this, that it's not going anywhere.
The only one of its kind left in the world from the 1970s for the steeplechase. This is where your enthusiasts usually say, oh, this steeplechase takes up a lot of space, but we like the steeplechase because it is unique.
Now, it was opened by Red Rum, a horse who had won the Grand National a few times. So he signed it with his horseshoe thing. Bit of a stretch. Now, it's an interesting ride. A lot of people do say they want to get rid of it. As I say, the Pleasure Beach have kind of said, nope, not on the chopping block. Well, that could change at any point. I mean, it will eventually go. It is getting a little bit rough and showing its age these days, particularly those brakes. They are brutal coming back into the station. But as I say, it is a unique ride. And found a picture of my first experience on it, and I look absolutely petrified, and I've just left the station. Another thing we got in 77 was the Thompson Carousel, which, I mean, it's a carousel, what more is there to say? We also got Magnus's Mini Dodgems. Now, I found a picture and I found a video, both different. I believe the picture is Magnus's Mini Dodgems, and I think the video might actually be Auto Scooter that I said I couldn't find footage for. Let me know in the comments below if that's right or if I've slightly off, but pretty sure from what I've seen online, the picture is the Magnus's Mini Dodgems. Now, the park also added Astro Glide, which was a set of 9 joined giant slides. A small bit of footage here from it. The last ride I can find from 77 was called Orbiter. Now, I can't find footage of it on the park, but I did find footage of this style of ride in another park. And moving on to 78, we got a couple of weird and wonderful things. The first one, not so much, it was just the planetarium. Now, I can't find any images of this, so I'm assuming it was what we would traditionally believe as a planetarium, which is usually like a projected screen on the roof. It's in the building that later became Black Hole and is currently empty, nothing in it. In addition to that, we got a couple of rides. Now, one of them is very, very strange. It's called Scat. I saw a picture of one, but I found footage of one on a travelling circuit, and it's kind of like, now there was the, what was it called, Millennium Bug, that was the kind of circular ring that you stand against the wall, you're pinned and it spins round. Sort of like that, but little square carriages that rotate, and there's 2 of them on. There's a video, it's just a weird looking thing. The other travelling ride that we got was called Satellite. Now, this is, again, it's a sort of circular disc that rotates and kind of went up on an angle. Sort of similar to the last Retro Squad ride that was in Alton Towers a couple of years ago, except the seats were facing forward instead of facing out the way. But again, I found some footage of that one. And the last ride that we got was the Wonderful World of Entertainment, which became the greatest show on Earth later, a few years later. We'll get onto that one. It was initially situated inside the casino building, so as you know, Greatest Show on Earth was further down the park. But yeah, it was a suspended dark ride. It was modified when it was moved, you know, changed scenes and stuff. But yeah, it started off in the casino building. 79 saw a bunch of things come in. The first one was swamp buggies. Now, these were kind of like inflatable boat things, powered boats with a steering wheel. I'm not convinced you could steer them, but you know, there was the illusion that you could steer them. Interestingly, when the wristbands came in many years down the line, these weren't included on that wristband and they were a separate charge. But we also got the gallopers, which again are still there to this day, just basically a giant carousel. When I was there a few weeks ago though, it was only open for 2 hours throughout the whole day, which, as I've said on some of the previous attractions, it's not great that they're not open as much. I do wonder if that is well, it's almost certainly a cost-saving exercise, but I want to be optimistic and say it's cost-saving to put money elsewhere, rather than paying for staff to operate a ride that's largely unused, save that money to invest back in the park. Fingers crossed, I'm being optimistic here. Now, we also got the water chute. Now, you may remember me saying in a previous episode there was a water chute. This was the second water chute. The first one was a manned water chute, so it took you up, spun you around, and then there was a member of staff in it that would sort of paddle it back to the station. And this one was fully on a track, so when it came back down again, it moved itself back into the station. And now this was later known as Viking R. I don't know how you pronounce it, but Viking AR. Was rethemed around about the opening of Valhalla. Now, this ride was opened by the country and western singer George Hamilton IV. We got another fairly big installation this year as well, and that was of course the Revolution. Another aerodynamics classic. It was Europe's first looping steel coaster. It's also the only version of this ride that ever had a cantilever structure. As you kind of know, it's kind of suspended at both ends because of the footprint it has to cover inside the park. This ride was tested by Doris. Now again, Doris tested maybe not everything. I don't know if she tested the big one. We'll get onto that later on. But she tested most things. She was some woman, and at that point, she was well into her 70s. Now, it has had a few colour scheme changes over the years. It was red and white. It was then blue and orange for when it was sponsored by Iron Brew. And of course, it's now kind of a grey, silvery colour. Interestingly, I can't find this, but I do remember seeing either last year or the year before on one of the Facebook forums, during winter maintenance, they'd taken down the Revolution sign, presumably clean it, tar it up, whatever it was, and behind it was still the Iron Brew Revolution. So, I mean, it's probably never going to happen again, but it's still there. So moving on to 1980, we have yet another busy year. Geoffrey was definitely a busy guy. Now, we started off with Twister. Now, this was a Twister ride. You'll have seen versions of it. Most notably, we've got Flavio's Fabulous Fandango at Alton Towers, which is the same sort of ride. This was initially situated over by Revolution, and as I kind of alluded to earlier, it did temporarily sit on the site where Monster was before Ice Blast was installed. Now, we also got a pirate ship known as Tidal Wave. Now, I didn't realise I'd been on this, not in Blackpool, at least I don't think I was on it in Blackpool, but when it left the park, it was relocated up to Scotland in M&D's. Don't know why you'd visit M&D's, but I did. And it was the Pirate's Curse, which is still there to this day. And we also got Takado Express. It was this kind of simple figure-of-8 style roller coaster. Now, I did find a clip from a BBC documentary that we'll cover later on, where the ride got stuck and they had to get people down with a ladder, and one woman was absolutely petrified.
The woman stuck on the Takado Express is terrified of ladders. Even her partner is having trouble coaxing her down. The company compensates disappointed customers.
Have you got any tickets on you?
Not no, won't give any.
I mean, we're looking at quite a few each here, aren't we? Bloody hellfire. How much are we looking at each?
Like a few. How many is involved?
At least 16 people.
Now, the park also got a set of animatronics, which, I mean, there aren't really, well, I suppose there's animatronics in Wallace and Gromit. I was going to say, not something you usually see in Pleasure Beach, but they got a set of animatronics called the Hard Luck Bears. Now, these were basically dancing, singing bears that told jokes, later moved to Frontierland, but I did find a clip where they were singing a rather catchy little ditty.
I'm on Blackpool Pleasure Beach, go and have a ride on Blackpool Pleasure Beach, nowhere else to go. When you think you're feeling low, go Blackpool Pleasure Beach.
Now, one ride that came to Blackpool, and I didn't realise this was ever on the Pleasure Beach, but I mean, I've got pictures of it, so it definitely was. And that was a Huss Enterprise known as Starship Enterprise. You may be familiar with this. There was one in Towers until recently just called Enterprise. And you've probably been on one. Now, this was the year that we got Grand Prix. I mean, you've seen the previous episode where we got the Grand Prix you think of, but at that point, at this point, that was called Turnpike. Grand Prix back then was a completely different ride. It was just a simple circular ride, connected cars on a sort of incline that went round. So that was the first Grand Prix that we had in the park. And another one that I think this was in, it was definitely in Alton Towers when I did that video. I can't remember if there was one in Thorpe Park, but they were fairly common back in this sort of period, was Cinema 180. Now, in the case of the one in Blackpool, it showed a 12-minute USA themed video. If you went in and saw that, let me know if it was any good. My gut says it probably wasn't, but that was on the park. Now to celebrate the Queen Mum's birthday, in August this year, they actually issued a number of free tickets to school kids. So if you turned up on that particular Monday, you got a number of free rides. Also found footage of a rather bizarre stunt. Not quite sure what the motivation behind this one was, but a group of Boy Scouts decided to try and eat their packed lunch on the Revolution. I mean, as you can imagine, that didn't go well.
Are you sure you want to eat on the Revolution?
Yes! 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is also the year that I found the first advert for the park.
Welcome to Europe's greatest amusement park, where the fun comes king-size. King-size thrills on king-size rides. King-size excitement coming at you from all sides. It's king of them all, Blackpool Pleasure Beach.
So 1981 saw the addition of Skydiver, and from what I can tell, this was just another paratrooper type ride, a bit similar to the one that we had a while back that was removed. Apparently they got a second one. You'll see a recurring theme. There's a few times that ride types make a reappearance. I mean, God knows how many dodgems they've had. I think I lost count whilst I was researching this. And the next ride we got, again, was similar to previous attraction. It was a sort of more up-to-date version, and that was Sidewinder. Now, this was a rollerplane style attraction that made its way up to Scotland and ended up in Cadonas in Aberdeen. I've only got pictures of it in Blackpool, but I've got some footage of a similar attraction elsewhere. Another ride that appeared this year that, again, I found one picture of it on site, but I found footage of it elsewhere, was Rockoplane. This is a weird one. It's kind of like a Ferris wheel, except the gondolas rock forward and back, not rotate like some carousels do. So 82 saw 3 more attractions added. The first one was bobsleigh. Got a picture of it here, but it didn't last very long. It only made 1 season. The next one we got was Phantom Chase. Again, you'll probably be familiar with this one. It's a Matterhorn style ride. Again, there's some pictures of it in the park, but here is some footage of one on the travelling circuit. The last one that got added, and I guess this probably just showcases Geoffrey's personality perfectly, was Die Fliegende Teppich. Apologies to any Germans, probably butchered that one. Effectively, it is the flying carpet, but it came from Germany and that had the German name on it. Despite it being a fairly straightforward flying carpet ride, Geoffrey Thompson decided to launch it by turning up at the park riding an elephant. So 83 saw another ride called the Ranger. Now, you may have seen these, you probably have. It's sort of conceptually like a pirate ship, fully enclosed with restraints, and the reason for that is because it does a full 360, so it goes a little bit further than your average pirate ship. And we also got Ben Hur. Now it was sort of similar to the Whip in that it kind of skidded around corners. The difference here was it was a perfectly circular track rather than kind of oval shaped, and you had a pedal, so you controlled that kind of skidding off each car. And the last thing they got added in 83 is a little bit ironic, because in 83 they added a picnic area. And the reason that's ironic is because nowadays you're not allowed to take food into the park. They actively encouraged it back then. And we got one addition in 84, but it was fairly big, and that was, of course, Space Invader. Now this was an indoor roller coaster, which still exists to this day. You can visit it at Breen Leisure Park. It's called Astro Storm now, I believe. I don't think I ever went on this one. Now, it obviously became Space Invader 2 in the future. It was opened by a Doctor Who, so there's some pictures of him there. And unfortunately, as we'll cover next, maybe at the end of this episode, probably start the next one, there was unfortunately a tragedy in this ride, but we'll get to that later on. I can't find any new attractions in 1985, but I did find this rather unusual advert for the park.
You won't find the world's largest selection of big thrill rides in America, because Blackpool Pleasure Beach is in little old England.
So after a couple of quiet years, 1987 did see a few additions to the park. The first thing we got was Tagada. Now this, you've probably seen these, they still exist on the travelling circuit. Big round disc that you sit in, it spins and kind of bumps and tries to knock you out of your seat. As many of you know, this later became part of the Trauma Towers, but it was a standalone attraction to begin with. We also got a small Pinfari coaster called the Clown Circus. I mean, I know clowns are kind of used for kiddie things, but aren't a lot of people petrified of clowns? Is that just a modern thing, like back in the 80s? Were we a little harder back then? Now, I mentioned a couple of years ago we got the planetarium, which was later reused, and actually this was the year that it became the Black Hole, which was basically just waltzers in pitch black, which I'm curious how that worked. I mean, one of the key things of waltzers, if you saw the waltzers when they were at Alton Towers, they were pathetic because they weren't allowing the staff to go on and spin you. They just let it do its own thing, which is very, very tame. I would imagine, given that this was completely in the dark, I mean, unless the staff were wearing night goggles, which is highly unlikely, probably the same, right? It was just spinning all by itself. If you went on a black hole, please let me know, because I'm curious how that actually worked. And the last attraction we got this year was the Rainbow. Now, we'll see some footage later on of Geoffrey being interviewed on that, but effectively this was like a large platform with, I think it was 3 rows of seats, and a giant rainbow over the top of it, and it kind of went round in the motion, not too dissimilar to Miami on the travelling circuit, but significantly taller and not quite as fast moving. But yeah, that was quite a visual spectacle in the park. Yeah, this was also the year that the Blackpool Pleasure Beach train station opened, which is just located literally at the park. Convenient for a way to get there by public transport, but yeah, that made it a lot easier for people to get to the Pleasure Beach. Now we got another major installation in 1988, and that was the Avalanche. Now this is a Mack Rides bobsled coaster. Again, still in the park today. There's rumblings that it may be on the way out, but it doesn't seem to be happening immediately. In fact, I think last year it was mostly running on one train because the second one was sent to Germany to get fixed. So if they're doing that, it's obviously still got a bit of life left in the old dog. But this was opened by Eddie the Eagle. Now this was opened in a time when obviously it was still paper ride back then, and as a nice little treat, Geoffrey Thompson decided to make it free for the first hour to see how many people he could get on that ride.
Hello everybody, I've only got 2 jobs to do this morning. The first job is to say that for the first hour after the official opening, and after all the VIPs have been on the ride is totally free.
Now there's also footage of him and Doris testing this. Again, despite the fact at this point, I think she's 85 years old at this point, she still tested that ride on opening day. And that gets crazier as she gets older. Now, this was one of the first rides that I can find that had its own dedicated TV advert, so let's take a look at that one.
There's been nothing to match the thrill of a bobsleigh ride until the Avalanche. Experience the thrill of a lifetime only at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. We dare you to ride it.
I did also find an episode of Blue Peter from this year, and I'm judging that based on the presenters and the fact that Avalanche is in this episode. So we had Yvette Fielding and Mark Curry, and they went on the Grand National, and they also went on Avalanche with Doris.
At 85, Mrs. Thompson still tests all the new rides.
Did you pull the bar back?
I've got no idea, it's all up to you. From now on, I just keep my eyes closed.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff being filmed on the Pleasure Beach this year because, and this happens multiple times, you'll hear about future occurrences of this, but Coronation Street filmed an episode on the park in 1988.
Oh, great! Yeah! Hey, we're going on then, Mark!
Are you serious?
Well, of course I haven't come here just to look at it, have I? Hey, yeah, me and Curly going on it, aren't we, lovely?
Probably.
Come on, Millie.
And many of you will remember from your childhood, well, hopefully your childhood, Johnny Ball Knows All. He filmed an episode in the Pleasure Beach this year and talked about various attractions. What I thought was quite interesting was that he did discuss the Revolution, and it looks like he did so whilst the ride was open. Now obviously nowadays the ride would be shut, it wouldn't, you know, it'd be like turned off and all that kind of stuff. There's people in the queue behind him, and I'm pretty sure he's got the, 60 seconds it takes for the ride to go along and back to sort of crouch down by the track, touch the track, do his little talk, then move on.
The track is two huge pipes held parallel and apart by these brackets, and you can see where the wheels run on the top, but also on the side and underneath to make sure the car is clamped securely to the track.
Now, speaking of Doris, I did find an interview with her and Terry Wogan, partly to do with the launch of Avalanche, and she discusses testing the rides.
Be good for your health. I mean, 85 years of age and still on all these death-defying rides.
It's very good for me. It's invigorating.
It doesn't give you heart attacks, or
no,
indigestion.
No, it's always very sound, because before I went on the Revolution, I made the decision to go and see the doctor, and I had a complete test of everything, and he said, "You're in very good health, you can ride whatever you wish. There's only one thing you mustn't do. You mustn't ask me to go with you."
No.
Now, 1989 was a bit of a tough year for the park because there was a severe storm that completely flooded the park. And I found some footage of this. There's a car washed up under the black hole. The Grand National Tunnel is fully submerged. The log flume is no longer a log flume because the water has risen to the same level as the log flume, and there's boats just floating around outside the Wild Mouse. Can only imagine how long that took them to clean back up again. So 1990 saw a fresh new look for the park. This was where we got the logo that many of you will recall, Mr. Funshine and Pleasure Beach. Obviously it had been called Pleasure Beach and we'd had Mr. Funshine, but this was kind of the first time they were put together in a sort of nice friendly package. So yeah, a little bit of rebranding, which, well, that's obviously happened again this year, but maybe not quite as positively received. Now, the wonderful world of entertainment that I mentioned a few years ago, that was moved over to, well, its final resting place effectively, which was the greatest show on earth. As I said, the ride was updated a little bit, new scenes added, etc. And of course, sadly, that has been replaced with Burger King. A little bit of a downgrade. I also alluded to earlier the fact that there was an interview with Geoffrey Thompson on the Rainbow Ride, and that actually happened this year. So the Life on One show with Simon Mayo and Sarah Green was filmed on the park, and Simon Mayo asked Geoffrey about ride safety.
With me now is Geoffrey Thompson. He's the managing director of Blackpool Pleasure Beach. We've heard the statistics about fares and safety here, and generally they're good news, but it is still a voluntary code. Do you think it would help if it was made legal?
Well, the highway code is a voluntary code, and I think it works very well. Our industry has an incredibly good safety record, and as it's working so well at the moment, why change anything?
They also did a few other things in there. They put Sarah Green on the Grand National and strapped her to a heart monitor so you could see the effects of roller coasters, and they talked to various psychologists about why we put ourselves through this, and you know, for many of us, me included, it's all about the adrenaline rush. Oh, and the Grand National gets a new station, a £1 million makeover. So in 1991 we got one addition and one removal, although it wasn't an intentional removal, and that was of course the removal of the funhouse due to a fire that completely ravaged the entire site. And all that was left, here's a picture of Geoffrey Thompson holding the Laughing Man's head. He did also have a few words to say.
People from all over Britain have been ringing us up this morning. In fact, late last night they were ringing our switchboard, just saying how sorry they were to see the old funhouse, which held so many happy memories for them, totally destroyed. And the addition we got in 1991 was Ripley's Believe It or Not, which, it's a weird one because it's outside the park. It's obviously a separate upcharge. I'm curious
I don't think you can access it from inside. I'm pretty sure, given the rides that are in that area, it's just not accessible. And again, now that they're moving to this resort, I mean, they obviously mentioned the fact that they've got the golf, they've got the hotels, they've got Ripley's Believe It or Not. Just kind of feels like it should be in the park and a little bit more integrated to make it that resort. But yeah, I mean, it's Ripley Believe It or Not. You know what they are, just show weird and wonderful artifacts. There was one small addition in 1992, and that was the Beaver Creek log flume. Still exists in the park today as Rugrats Lost River. If you've ever been there on opening weekend and or been at any Your Experience Guide event, you know that Mike loves to do a little takeover and lap that thing till he is drenched to the bone. Now, nothing was specifically added in 1993, but obviously we know there was a huge change coming in 1994, so there was a ton of construction, loads of advertising for Project 94. I also found this picture of John Major with a model of the big one. Well, I'm guessing that was in 1993. There's no point standing with a model in 94 when the real thing exists. Right, so move on to 1994. Massive year, not just for this park, but it was obviously later became known as the year of the coaster in the UK, because as well as the big one, we also got Nemesis and Towers, and we got Shockwave in Drayton Manor. So the big one when it launched was, of course, the world's tallest and fastest coaster. It remained the UK's tallest until this year when Hyperia took that crown from them, and they've kind of teased they're trying to do something about that. We'll cover that later on. Now, the ride was opened by the Philharmonics Orchestra. There's pictures of them sitting in the train on the brake run with their kind of instruments. I'm curious if they attempted to play the instruments whilst going around the ride. My guess is this is purely a promotional shot at the end, but that's food for thought. It'd be interesting to see them trying to go around that drop and play a violin. Curious idea. Now, back then, the ride used to operate continuously on 3 trains. Again, we're back in the days where bums on seats made money, so it was in their interest to keep that thing operating constantly, cycling. I think they were dispatching a train as frequently as every 56 seconds, which, again, people take so long fanning about with their bags and their phones and putting stuff in their pockets, and like, ride-ups of that speed just are not feasible anymore, unless you've got something like Universal where they just make you get rid of everything before you get to the ride itself. You won't see it running on 3 trains anymore. They do have 3 serviceable trains, and it's got quite a unique transfer track in the station with 3 different levels, but nowadays it is programmed to a maximum of 2 trains. Now, it had a bit of a rocky start because in the opening year there was an accident where 2 of the trains collided. Not really at much speed, it was on the brake run, but nonetheless, here's Andy Crane to explain what happened.
But in July, a train was held here and another train came and ran into the back of it. Nobody was seriously hurt, but quite a few people were badly shaken up. Computers don't break down, do they? So what went wrong? What they've since found out is that a sensor failed in the final section of the track just before the station. The logic controller sensed this and operated the brakes up here as a failsafe, which is what it was designed to do. What it didn't do, however, was to stop the train that was up here completely. So it ran on around the track and ran into the train in front, just in front of the station at between 5 and 10 miles an hour.
I also found pictures of some celebrities on this one. The first one I found was Ethan Phillips and Robert Duncan McNeil, who played Neelix and Robert Picardo, no, not Robert Picardo, Tom Paris in Star Trek Voyager. I'm pretty sure there was an episode around about the 90s where they came back to Earth, so maybe they just kind of moonlighted and went on the big one. I also found a picture of Paul Gascoigne and more recently a picture of Gary Barlow. It was interesting, back then there was a lot more competition between the parks. Towers was at that point already a kind of pay to enter, not pay per ride, but you know, there's, as is still the case to this day, there was lots of voucher offers in newspapers to get discounts and stuff. And actually, Blackpool said they would take the Alton Towers vouchers from the Sun newspaper and give you half-price entry or tickets to the park. Now, there is so much more I could tell you around about the big one itself. And actually, I already have. I did a video specifically going through 30 facts about this ride, for us its 30th birthday. So if you haven't already seen that one, I'll put a card up there. Watch it after this episode. Now, it wasn't just the big one that had a little bit of a collision in '94, because the Avalanche did as well. Here's a little clip of them trying to deal with that one.
JR now has a real crisis on his hands. The bobsleigh avalanche ride has crashed, 14 passengers are stranded 25 feet up, and some are injured. Sandy, the park's own medic, is on the scene.
We've had a card jump on the brake. We don't know why yet. We've got one young fella that's hurt, and we're just going up to reassure him to get him out.
So I've already mentioned that Coronation Street popped onto the site for an episode a few years back. They did so again in 1994, and this time they left a mark, because the episode was Vera and her fancy man kind of moonlighting inside the pleasure beach, and they put the Tunnel of Love sign around the River Caves entrance specifically for Coronation Street, and well, they never removed it. It's still there. Now, there used to be tons of Tunnel of Love style attractions. They've died a death because, well, I'm going to read this quote here. With the development of other socially acceptable opportunities and less stigma for unmarried couples to engage in physical contact, these rides became less popular and were either rethemed into children's attractions or torn down completely. You don't need to go and hide on the river caves for a little kiss anymore. Now, if you're enjoying this episode, please do give it a like and consider subscribing. I do this for various other parks, and I'm always open to suggestions for future parks to review. There's also one more episode to come with Amanda, so if you're subscribed, you'll be told when that happens. I'd also love you to share your stories from this area. This is probably the one that I'm most likely to get. A lot of people have fond memories, so yeah, let me know what your memories are of the park in this era. Now, after such a massive investment in 1994, we didn't see any new attractions in 1995, but I did find quite a few entertainment related things. The first one was Simply Red, who filmed the music video for the Fairground song. I'll probably put a very short snippet of this in because I don't want to get copyright struck.
And I love the thought of coming home to you.
Second thing I found was that Little and Large performed at the Paradise Room. And the last one was there was a movie called Funny Bones with Lee Evans that was kind of set at the Pleasure Beach, or near the Pleasure Beach, and it had a lot to do with the Ghost Train. Now, moving on to 1996, this was the park's 100th anniversary, and to celebrate that they painted the casino building pink. I'm pretty sure they put candles along the top as well. In terms of new attractions, we got Bridgestone go-karts, which were situated in the centre of Steeplechase and sat there until the installation of Icon, which obviously now goes through the Steeplechase, and well, they had to get removed. I did find a price book for tickets back in 1996. I'm sure many of you remember this. A lot of you have said the old days where you would buy tickets and there was obviously A attractions, B attractions, C attractions, all that kind of good stuff. So here's a little bit of nostalgia for you. Now, one thing I found that I don't know if this still exists to this day or not, and let me know in the comments. I'm certainly going to look out for it the next time I visit the park, is that there was a small memorial plaque put up to the victims of Dunblane, and that was situated underneath the Revolution. As I say, I've never noticed that, so I'm curious if it still exists. Now, 1997 saw another new attraction, and that was the PlayStation, or, well, Ice Blast as we know it, but PlayStation as Amanda calls it, even to this day. Now, this is an SNS shot tower, fairly standard nowadays, but this was kind of fairly big back then. In fact, I saw a video where they claimed it was using space age technology. It's just a pump that shoots you up in the air. I also found some footage of Amanda and Geoffrey and Nick getting an early test on it whilst it was still being constructed. Didn't quite go to plan though, because they sat there for 20 minutes waiting on the damn thing to work. So not dissimilar to now, where it just sits there not operating.
Here we go! Hey! Oh, is it going or not? Oh dear, oh dear. Oh, what's happening?
Now, interestingly, when it did eventually open, it was opened by Boyzone, and they took a test ride on it along with Doris, who at this point is well into her 90s. And if you see this footage, not convinced they did her restraints up, because that woman gets some amount of airtime. the Chinese puzzle maze was also added in 1997. I don't know, I'm curious to see how often you guys visit the puzzle maze. I very, very rarely go in. I mean, it got a paint job this year, it was kind of nicely done up. The only times I go in there is if I'm trying to get footage of one of the other attractions, like the steeplechase or the big one. But yeah, I mean, it's still there if you fancy getting lost in amongst the hedges. Now, this was the year that there was a BBC mini-series filmed in the park. And there's a few little highlights that I kind of want to pull out and show you. So the first one is that the Alice ride broke down, and obviously they had to get the engineers out to fix it. But they had a very different approach to fixing rides back then.
JR has got wind of the breakdown. He's on the case to make sure that Keith doesn't dawdle. The ride is losing money.
Just get them off. I don't care. Get it open. Now. Just get it off. Repair it in the workshop. Do it now.
That's what we're doing. We're taking them off. Had to get them here first.
Now, another thing, many of you have said you missed the days where it was free to enter the park and just wander around and pay for whatever you need. I have to say, watching this series has made me question that one, because it looks like it was rough as hell and there was a lot of riffraff. Now, the park had tons of security back then. I didn't even know that the park had cells. I don't know if they still do. But yeah, here's a little clip just to remind you of how rough it could be.
Bill Mullins' team has swung into action. Bradley Beaver has been assaulted in the children's park, and they've spotted the culprits on the swamp buggies.
Just let you all know you're all under arrest for assault, all right? Right, we've got a witness that says you three lads have assaulted a female.
Now, there was also a bomb scare in this episode, and they just took the decision that it was a hoax and didn't tell anybody about it.
Bernard, we've had a bomb scare. Somebody's phoned in on the police. You can let your radio people know. They're not to put it out over the air. They're to keep their mouths shut. I am warning everybody just to go around and check in their own areas and whatever.
They also had some fun with people putting soap suds into various attractions, including the river caves, which they had to keep putting in kind of like chemicals to remove the soap suds, till eventually they had to shut the ride down because they ran out of chemicals.
The soap bandits have struck. The park's waterways are solid with suds.
We've been had. We've been got at again.
And wasn't quite as accessible back then. A bunch of wheelchair guests wanted to ride the big one and were told that they couldn't because they couldn't shut the ride down long enough to let them get on. So they weren't allowed on and they protested and blocked the queue.
Hi, there's 8 of us wanted to go on, but 3 are in wheelchairs. Can you help us out with access, please? You're saying that we can't go on the ride at all?
Not at the moment. No.
Why?
Because they're moving a train every minute.
They're moving at one train every minute?
Yeah, the only way that they could take them would be to shut the whole ride down.
Are you going to shut the ride for us to get on? You're not going to shut the ride for us to get on?
The last thing I've got from 1997 is this TV advert.
Blackpool Pleasure Beach. How long have you got? 2 minutes? 2 hours. 2 days. A whole week? Blackpool Pleasure Beach, the roller coaster capital of the world. How long have you got?
Now, the edition for 1998 was Passage del Terror. Now, I have not done this, and there's no footage inside because you're not allowed to film, but it's basically kind of like an all year round scare attraction. I did find an advert for it when it first kind of kicked around, so if you are easily scared, maybe skip the next 90 seconds. Yeah, this was also the year that American coaster enthusiast Richard Rodriguez set a world record for the longest time on a given coaster. And he chose Big Dipper of all things, and he did it for over 1,000 hours. Sleeping, eating, just the whole thing. Like, he was allowed, I think he was allowed 5 minutes per hour, and he would save them up so he could go and have a shower and go to the toilet and get something to eat. But yeah, he basically rode it for 8,000 hours. Now he comes back in a few years and beats his own record, but yeah. Would you choose the Big Dipper for that?
That was the underpass, the tunnel underneath. That wakes me up almost every night. It's so loud. It's it just gives you a real jolt.
Now, 1999 saw Trauma Towers. Now, I mentioned earlier, so this was a combination of the Haunted Hotel and the Tagada ride, which were already sitting next to each other. So they just kind of enclosed it in a new facade and made Tagada the finale. Now, this was the year that unlimited ride wristbands came in. And I know there's certainly many of you, listen, there's no arguments. The pricing structure of Pleasure Beach right now is a mess. And as you'll see as we get into Amanda's reign in the next episode, even as little as 4 or 5 years ago, it was like 20 quid to get in, and now it's 50 quid. So the price has shot up phenomenally. Obviously, it used to be non-rider, used to be pay-per ride. They do need to do something about their pricing structure. I think it would probably be an operational nightmare for them right now to go back to pay-per ride, because they're just not set up for it like they were back then. But yeah, this was the year that you could get a wristband and not worry about paying for every single ride you went on. There was also a wedding at the park, and they decided to toast that wedding at the top of the big one. And then this year, for the big one's 30th birthday, they recreated that photo. There was also another wedding that didn't happen at the Pleasure Beach itself, but they then turned up at the Pleasure Beach, bride and groom still in their kind of wedding outfits, and they also decided to go on the big one.
Pete and Julie want to launch their married life with a glass of bubbly at the top of the world's tallest roller coaster, the big one. Keith has let them jump the queue.
Pressure 3.5 times the Earth's normal force. Please do not stand up. Do not wave your arms in the air.
I'll be right. Okay. I'll see you at the top. Okay.
235 feet above the fray, they've stopped for the toast.
Congratulations. Some confetti. Who's in charge of the confetti? Right.
I think it's absolutely marvellous. Something different that they will remember all their lives.
The Pleasure Beach briefly appeared in the opening credits for a movie known as Whatever Happened to Harold Smith. And the last bizarre one I've got, I've wondered this for quite some time and kind of figured it out in this video. If you stood in the queue line for Icon, or if you remember being on the Grand Prix, at that section where the two kind of meet, there's this kind of mural wall on the side of lots of naked people bathing. Well, that was added in 1999. Now, it wasn't made for the park. It was commissioned in 1980, and then it was moved to the park in 1999. Now, we start the millennium with a massive investment for the park, and that, of course, was Project 2000 that later became known as Valhalla. Now, this is obviously still on site to this day. It was described during construction as a combination of a log flume and a ghost train. Interesting description for it. Now, I did see a comment from Geoffrey where, well, I'll let him say it himself.
Well, we always build enormous and spectacular rides about every 3 or 4 years. And if we didn't, I think the public would be very disappointed.
Now, the ride was opened in 2000 by Jonathan Ross.
In parts of life now, we've been all over the world, so I can honestly say that of all the places we've been, all the parks we've been to, Blackpool is the most fun, and Blackpool Pleasure Beach has the most rides, is the best place to visit, and it's just about to become even better. We are looking forward to getting tremendously wet. We're also looking forward to getting rid of these bloody stupid hats.
It's won many golden tickets over the years for the best dark ride in the world, including actually last year when it just reopened, because as we all know, it closed in 2019 for a reimagining. Nobody knew 2020 was going to happen, and well, it took significantly longer to get that thing back up and running than expected, but it came back with a brand new facade and a changed interior. You may not know this, and I'm hoping that after that reimagining this is still there, but certainly in the original version, after that second, or at around that second drop, there was a Viking longboat inside there, and it actually was a seaworthy vessel called the Black Tern, and it was used in many Hollywood films. Now, interestingly, in the documentary for this ride, Doris makes this comment.
Been on everything. I mean, you know, until the big one, then I couldn't go on that, because I was then over 90 and it was a bit risky. I didn't want to collapse in the middle or have a heart attack, because that would have been very bad publicity. And usually I do most things for publicity. It's part of my contribution to the company.
Now, there was 2 more accidents in the park this year. The first one was a sad tragedy. I alluded to it earlier, and that was the death of an 11-year-old boy in Space Invader, who allegedly panicked, undid his seatbelt, and well, cartwheeled out of that ride and down the track. Sad story. And then the other accident was the big one itself. Again, there was a problem with the brakes, and 2 trains collided.
Good evening. At least 16 holidaymakers were hurt tonight in an accident on what's claimed to be the highest roller coaster ride in the world at Blackpool Pleasure Beach.
Thank you, Lucy. Mr. Thompson, let me ask you first of all, the ride, as we've heard, had broken down a couple of hours before last night's accident. Should it in fact have been reopened?
As we spoke earlier, it didn't break down. The computer shut the ride down because they thought there might have been a fault. It turned out there was no fault, and when the whole computerized system was cleared, it reopened.
We also got the Alpine Dodgems. Now, as I think I said this earlier, the park has had numerous sets of Dodgems over the years. This was another set. Coronation Street made yet another appearance in 2000.
Oh, not tonight, love. No, we've booked to go on North Fair.
So can't Norris do it?
Oh, no. He won't be out the ballroom till it closes. He's obsessed.
And I found there's a film called Married to Malcolm, which it's basically a guy with a double life. He's married to 2 people and he gets caught. But apparently there was sort of some scenes filmed on the Pleasure Beach, but from what I can tell, the movie is so bad I can't even find any clips of it anywhere. Now, speaking of films, 2001, the only thing I can find for the park was a little scene with Steve Coogan in the film Parole Officer.
That makes sense.
Now, we got a couple of small attractions in 2002. The first one was the Eddie Stobart ride. The second one was Spin Doctor, 2 giant boosters that used to sit on opposite side of Tom Sawyer's Bridge. And Doris, for her 100th birthday, she tested the rides. This was also the year that we got Impossible, which still exists today, and it was basically a combination of 1001 Troubles, the kind of mirror maze, along with the Haunted Swing. And as I alluded to earlier, well, don't know if that Haunted Swing will ever come back because it's closed right now. And listen, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but I found an episode of Most Haunted with Derek, what's his face, doing his thing.
What I do want to say is 2 of these spirits here, taking away Mr. Clog, or Clogs, made me feel entrepreneurial. In their day when they were here, they wanted these people to come. Now to see 7 million, they'd be thrilled to bits.
So 2003 was the final year where Geoffrey Thompson was in charge, not intentionally, as you'll find out at the start of the next episode. He sadly passed away in 2004. But in 2003 we got a few more additions. The first one was a small caterpillar coaster known as the Big Apple. The flying machines were sponsored by Ryanair. I'm guessing that means they were always late and charged you for the restraints. They decided to strap a Formula 1 car to the Big One track, and Ralph Furman went around in that car. Brave man. And there was some rumours that that Formula 1 car was the one that was situated outside Grand Prix in the station. Mixed sort of stories about that one. Some say it was, some say it wasn't. I mean, I think that's been removed now. They've obviously started to dismantle bits of the Grand Prix, so it's probably not there anymore anyway. Now, interestingly, again, we'll cover this in Amanda's video, because she's recently announced that there's the potential of a third hotel coming along. I always assumed that the hotels were all about Amanda. But we got the first one, the Big Blue, whilst Geoffrey was still in charge. I'm curious how many of you remember this, because so there's a restaurant on Park today called Coasters. Nice restaurant, not the best service, but you know, reasonably good food. It used to be called Coasters with an actual coaster car hanging off the top, but before that it was known as the Italian Job with a little mini hanging off the top, and obviously it served Italian food. I also found this picture of the small log flume that was in Beaver Creek when it was sponsored by Chewits. And I found this advert for a bingo hall that used the big one.
However exciting things get, nothing compares to the thrill of bingo, where there are up to £4 million in prizes won every day.
All the agreed. And we have a winner tonight's big money prize.
No wonder Britain's bingoing mad.
There you go, that is the end of this episode about Geoffrey Thompson. Definitely a very, very busy man, certainly compared to his predecessors and indeed his successor. I'd love to hear some stories from you guys, because this is probably the era where most of you have fond memories, so please do let me know down below. As I said earlier, if you're enjoying this, make sure you subscribe. I've set a crazy goal of hitting 10,000 subs by next year, and I'm going to get there. I just need your help, so that little button down there, if you could click that for me, that would be much appreciated. In the meantime, here's the previous episodes, and if the next one's up, it'll be there too. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad, and I'll see you in that final episode.